welcome to another one of my tutorials. For those people that are not familiar with my channel, the app that I'm using to do this tutorial is Procreate. I've opened an A4 default canvas here within Procreate, and the brushes I'm going to use are the airbrushes. The colours I'm going to use, so the codes for these are down in the description. Jot down the codes, type them in here, press enter, it will appear up here, and then you can start to piece together your own version of this colour palette as well. I do provide downloads for these colour palettes over at Patreon for my patrons. Again, there is a link for that down in the description. So to get started, first thing we're going to do on my colour palette, I've got this dark blue colour, and I'm going to go onto my soft airbrush, turn the opacity up, maybe not all the way, but pretty far up there. Turn the brush size and then the opacity up, and then I'm going to go across the top of the scene, in fact, I'm just going to fill it, why not? Of everything, just fill it like that. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my lighter blue colour. I'm going to start piecing in from the horizon here, the lighter colour, and I'm going to build it up a little bit. So I've not got the opacity on full, and I'm using a combination of the opacity and the pencil pressure, or the pressure that I'm actually applying to the canvas too. And I just want to create a little bit of a gradient. If I'm not happy with the overall effect that I've managed to come up with, I can always go onto the adjustments, use the Gaussian blur, slide it along to get a blur effect as well. But I'm not going to do that because I'm actually quite happy if it's a little bit textured in the background. I'm not going to do any strong kind of cloud effects for this, so I don't mind if it's a little bit textural, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go across, I'm going to use the lighter of the blue colours, turn the opacity down, maybe the brush size down a little bit as well, and I'm just going to, in fact maybe up a little bit more, I'm going to piece in some of this lighter blue in this area, maybe add it with a kind of circular motion. I'm only pressing really lightly, in fact that's too much. So I'm going to turn the opacity almost down to nothing and just start to piece it in there a little bit more like this. We're not going to see most of this, it's going to be behind some kind of mounting features that I'm going to add, but we're going to see little bits of it. Right, okay, I'm going to create another layer, and on this layer I'm going to move to my other colours. We've got a range of colours here. I don't know whether you can pick up the last colour that's actually on my row of colours, and likewise here we've got a couple of really dark colours, but here the colour is actually a very dark blue. But before we get to that, I'm going to use this kind of grey colour, turn the opacity up, change my brush to, in fact I should change it first, change it to a medium brush, then turn it up. I'm going to start piecing in something of a kind of mountain. Now it's not going to be distant kind of mountain, it's going to be like the bottom of a mountain really, so you're not going to see the uppermost peaks of this mountain, it's just going to be the bottom section of it. So in fact on that basis I'm not going to do this bottom bit, I'm just going to do the top section. And likewise over here I'm only going to do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to move along to my next colour, which is a kind of darker bluey colour, and this colour is going to be the colour that you mainly see. It's just that I wanted to create a little bit of an interplay between the blue and the grey. So the top area is going to be more of the grey, and then a large section of the rest of it is going to be this blue colour. So I'll move along my colours, this lighter blue colour, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be placing in what will be snow highlights, but it's going to be on the shadow side of this jutting out piece of rock. So when I come to add the highlights for the snow that's actually directly hit by the sun, it's going to be a lot lighter than this. So this is just some of the textures, some of the appropriate kind of colours for bits of snow, but not the sections of snow that are directly in the sunlight. So as I moved along the colours here, the bits that are going to be directly in the sunlight are going to be very much brighter, and there's going to be bits along certain edges that are going to be more impacted by the sunlight, as you can see here. I've also got a warmer tone to mix in with that as well. So you can see with the texture, I'm just keeping it quite loose. There's going to be some bits where it bunches together and you get more kind of flat areas of the tone, but otherwise I'm just keeping it quite loose, quite broken, quite random really. Again, so I'm using the lighter blue and the white to create a real dramatic contrasts from each other. So the blue is going to be the snow in the shadow, and the white is going to be the snow in the sunlight. So it can just be a slight change of angle, perhaps. So it's the same feature, it's just light hitting it in a different way. So you need to think of the light blue and the white as being the same thing, but just part of it turned slightly more towards the light and then part of it angled away. So I'm obviously thinking the sun's coming in from this side, so it's going to hit along here more, and then on this side it's going to hit more on here and more shadow on that side as well. So what I'm going to do is just focus all that kind of texture towards the top, and as it gets further down we're going to have even more shadow, less light hitting it, and maybe the snow actually breaks up and isn't apparent anyway. So I'm going to move over to this side now. I'm going to add some of the similar kind of effect onto this other edge. So there's not going to be so much of the blue this time. It's going to be more the two colours that are on this side. Now it's not to say that you have to have it on full opacity and press on solidly all the time. You can turn it down a little bit, build it up in intensity by pressing on lightly in some areas and pressing on more in others. So it's a better way of creating texture to do that anyway. I'm generally keeping the texture kind of moving in a downward motion here. It's almost like a bit of a cliff edge almost. So I'm keeping it sweeping downwards. That isn't to say there won't be some blue areas. There's going to be, again, subtle shifts and changes in the angles. So I'm going to have some blue in there as well. So I'm keeping it quite loose at this stage. You can always go back in and add some more of this texture. I'm going to use the colours here just to fade it out. So I'm going to move to the bigger brush just to start to fade this down. I'm going to do some trees in front of this area anyway, I think. So I'm not going to get too bogged down in the exact kind of texture and detail. I may end up losing a lot of it anyway with kind of tree foliage and things like that. So I'm just going to bring that down, fade it in a little bit more. Certainly more on this side than I will on that side. Okay, so looking at what I've created here now, I'm not entirely happy with the way that this is encroaching quite a lot onto the actual landscape. So one thing I can do at this point is I can take my mountain layer and I can go to the transform tool and I can just condense it in a little bit like this. And I can also do that with the background layer, or I can just move it up to match it as well, like that, or spread it. So now that I've changed the aspects of the painting, I'm just getting rid and tidying up that bottom section, and it now allows me the space to start adding in some of the other details. So I've created another layer, and on this layer I'm going to do some trees. So I'm going to pick my colour scheme now. I've got a dark blue on the end here. I'm going to go to my brush, use the medium airbrush, and turn the size of the brush down, and probably the opacity down somewhat as well. So I'm going to pick my horizon line, and I'm going to have it around sort of this kind of region. But I'm going to use this as a basis to know where my trees are kind of growing from. So I need to do the tree trunks and then just start to build outwards from there. So I can just fill in this bottom section. You're not going to see the bottom of the trees here. What I'm thinking might be useful is to knock some of them back by turning the opacity down, or changing the brightness so we can create different layers of the trees anyway. But I'm going to draw just a few more to begin with, and then we'll have a play around with that effect. So in terms of drawing these, I'm doing a main trunk of the tree, and then I'm just moving left and right, keeping kind of rough texture as I go along. It's going to be quite random. I want them all to be a little bit different, so some of the gaps are going to be more extreme than others, and then I just get kind of rougher as they kind of join together at the bottom. Now I'm going to do them across the scene, but some of them I'm going to paint over, erase, subdue, so you don't see them as clearly, but I'm going to still have them as an effect anyway. So these ones are the ones that I really need to make sure are in better detail, really, a bit finer detail. So I can take the layer that I've already created, I can duplicate it, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move it, maybe flip it horizontally, so it just creates a bit more chaos, like that. So you can see I've made them slightly shorter, offset them slightly. It gives a kind of doubling up of the effect. And then what also I can do is I can go into my brightness, make them slightly brighter for the ones I want to be brighter, and they're going to appear, if I just move them actually to be underneath and try again. To make them brighter, you can see you don't want to do too much because it makes them too bright and looks like white trees. Obviously you still want them to be darker than the background, you just want them to be lighter than the foreground trees. So you're just talking about a percentage or two lighter than the ones you've already put in there, like that. And something else that I can also do with that more background layer, because it is going to be in the background, I can also go to Gaussian blur and just start to blur them in slightly so that the impact is not quite as pronounced, knocks them back a little bit more, which is great. I think what I may do again is duplicate those again, and I'm going to move them. So I've created some bigger ones here. I can take that layer, I can duplicate that, flip it horizontally, just again to create a little bit more sense of chaos in the mix. I'm going to merge those two together, and what I'm going to do is I go to my eraser, make sure that that's also on a soft airbrush, and I'm just going to gradually start to erase the bottom section of these trees and the top sections to a certain extent too. I want them to be there, but I want them to be so slight in suggestion that it's not going to be too pronounced. So you can see that there is a suggestion that they are there, but it's not too much now. So I'm going to move those back in actual fact to be underneath all of those layers and go back again to my original layer. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate it one more time, move it along. I really want to just add a few more there. Again, I'm going to flip it horizontally. I do want those slightly taller ones over on this side, like that. But I'm going to just remove the ones on this edge. I only want really the impacts over them on this side, but I don't want them to be very extreme, so I'm going to erase them slightly, just so that they are there, but they're not making too strong an impact on the scene there. So just getting a balance. So they're there, but they're not going to dominate the scene at all. So the next thing I'm going to do, having created this layer, is go onto my bottom set of colors now. So I'm going to go to the lightest color, turn the opacity down somewhat. I'm still on the medium airbrush, and I'm just going to start putting in an area of land here. This is the actual kind of snow that's settled on the ground. That's really going to contrast nicely with the trees. So I'm creating a whole section here where the snow is. Before we get to the kind of water's edge, we're going to have just a nice area of flat looking snow. So moving along to my colours, I've got the brightest colour which I've just used. I'm going to go along to the next colour, which is a nice blue colour, turn the size of the brush down and the opacity down. And I'm just going to carefully go along this edge so it isn't quite as sharp a contrast between the snow and the trees. I want it to kind of just blend in a little bit, slightly softer contrast. I can also use this colour to maybe just add a slight suggestion. If I turn the opacity down, maybe go back to my soft airbrush actually, again opacity down, just create some slight atmospheric kind of conditions nearest the ground there, so it isn't quite such a hard line. If I feel like I've encroached too much, I can always go back to my lightest colour and just take off some of that blue colour if I'm not happy with the effect that it's having. Okay, I'm going to create another layer. On this layer I'm going to use the darker colours, so I'm going to use this very dark kind of blue colour. It's not quite the black, but it is a very dark blue, and I'm going to start piecing in some trees with my medium airbrush. I'm going to start putting in some more foreground trees now. So if I put in the trunks to begin with, and then just at this point I really quite carefully, quite precision based work, start putting in the kind of branches and the texture that I'm most happy with. I guess to a certain extent they don't have to be, you know, as if the only thing you're looking at in the scene. They're not really so precise, but they're certainly a little bit more detailed than they would have been in the kind of more distant trees. But we're going to add quite a few of them, so they're going to intermix anyway. So yeah, maybe you're not going to get too bogged down in the details of them. So we can do some really tall ones now. So they're going to be thicker trunks. The bottom of the trunk is going to be lower down in the scene because it's nearer to you as the viewer. And again, I'm just going to be moving left to right, adding some of these fine branches and texture on these trees. Spend a bit more time on these ones than you did in the distance, and we're just going to start building these up. Now as I get further down in this region, I'm going to do overlapping trees, so you're probably not going to see even any gaps through this at this stage. So I'm slightly less bothered about the detail down here as I was up here. You'll notice the individual trees at the top, but as they get further down, they kind of mix together and you don't really see the individual branches as much. So again, I'm going to create another tree. Again, I'm just going to really focus my time getting the kind of personality at the top of the tree, and then as it gets lower down, it's going to mix in with the other trees anyway, so you're going to see less of the breaks, less of the branches, so you don't have to worry as much. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to imagine that we have something of like a riverbank. So it's just where the edge of the water is, and we're going to have various sort of tufts, little branches, things that are sticking out, growing on the actual edge here. We're going to have a bit that's creating shadow where it isn't catching the light as much. I'm going to turn the size of my brush down. So I'm just going to start adding little details as I go along here. So the opacity isn't on full. I'm allowing my hand to be just kind of lightly adding texture, some branches, some twigs. I'm not going to get too heavy-handed with this. I don't really want to be too precise on anything. Maybe some clumps, some mounds, some bits where more foreground kind of trees grow even. So one thing I'm noticing at this point now is that even though I'm using quite a dark colour, we're a little bit competing with the background. So what I'm going to do is figure out where the trees in the background are. In fact, what I may do, might be a really good thing to do, is merge down all of the trees together so that they're on one layer. So I'm not talking about the foreground trees here, I'm talking about all of the background trees. And then what I can do, if I go to that tree layer, is create another layer, and it's created a layer in front and on top of those trees. So I can go back to my colours, I can go to my second blue colour, go to a soft airbrush, turn the opacity down, and simply by now creating just a slightly lighter colour on top and creating more mist and atmospherics, we're hopefully going to be allowing these details to jump forward a little bit better. So something like that. So I can go back to my top layer now, and again I can go back to the colours that I was using. Need to make sure they go back to my medium airbrush, and I can just continue working on those now, and they will naturally be more visible. It does mean that perhaps I need to go back and correct those and fine tune them a little bit better now that I can see them more clearly, but it's better that you can see what you're doing now. Paintings do evolve like this. You can't always be sure on the levels of things until you've done a little bit more, and then you just have to be prepared to go back and reevaluate what you've done on a previous part of the painting and adjust it so that the current bits that you're working on are benefited from that and work better. So what I might do for these details actually is go onto the combinations of the blues. So I've got the darkest blue here, and I might start to create some textures with that blue, and even that's quite a strong blue, so maybe I should use that blue and start to create some textures with this blue as well. So now I can go back to my darker blues again. Yeah, we've got pretty much similar colours across the board here, so don't be afraid to mix and match the different blues, and it's also quite a good way of kind of uniting and bringing all of your scene together as well, so use that to your advantage. Yeah, so I created some breaks in texture, some kind of mounds where there's not much light going to be getting at all, or the snow rather is probably more important. It's not going to be gathering, because the really dark areas here are where, yes, the light's not reaching as much, but the snow isn't there either, because the snow is the main thing that actually reflects the light back. So when you get a really dark area, it's probably because there's not as much snow there. So you might get some kind of stones, some rocks, where maybe the snow gathers on the top of them, but the underside, you're going to see the bottom of the rock. So you get kind of breaks in the snow here as well. Again, use the different kinds of blue to your advantage. Maybe there's some kind of almost like shells, bits where you get a kind of band of darkness going across. So what I'm going to suggest you do now is, if you 3 fingers down, copy all, and then paste, what you've got now is the entire image on one layer. So what I'm going to suggest you do is you flip it vertically, and I'm going to recommend that you move it down here. So in fact, I'm going to suggest that you condense it somewhat. Whoops, we'll try again. We'll have to go on freeform to do that. So we squish it a little bit like that, move it down, and then we're going to have to play around with the opacity to see exactly what we've got here. So you can see the mountain ranges lining up there and there. So you want to think about maybe just condensing it somewhat. So you imagine the horizon line is about there. See, that's the point at which you're going to mirror it from. It's not going to be the water's edge. It's not going to come from there. It's going to come from the horizon line. So you can imagine the top of the tree there and there, and you can kind of see a kind of mirror reflection there and there. So something like that. And then all you need to do with your eraser is just erase the bit that you don't want to be reflected in the water. So that's before it reaches the water's edge. Just get a little bit more precise when it gets actually to the water's edge there. Erase all the bits that you don't want on this new layer. Then you can turn the opacity back up. You've got something that's working a little bit better as a reflection. Go to your motion blur perhaps, and just start to create friction in the water so it's not such an obvious mirror-like reflection. In fact, what I'd prefer to do at this point is bring that previous layer I was just working on and put it on the top. So that's the layer with the river's edge on there as well. So we can just continue working on that layer. That would be really useful. What you might find useful is actually to do the similar to what we've just done and duplicate that layer and then flip that one vertically. Again, maybe condense it somewhat, maybe not that much, and just have that as a reflected element in the water too. Again, go to motion blur, maybe not as much for that, and there you go. Again though, I would probably place that under that one. So now, again, still we've got the more important riverbank as the top layer. So I'm going to continue adding some little finer details on here. I could have waited, but I don't think these little tiny details are the kind of thing that would pick up on the reflection anyway. So I'm just going to do the smallest details here. So I'm going to go to my blue colour here. I'm going to use that blue, and I'm just going to start working in some extra textures in here as well. What I might start doing is just create some breaks in the water. I'm not going to do it on the lighter bits because it doesn't make as much sense there. It makes more sense on the darker regions, but just use it perhaps faintly. I'm also going to use perhaps one of my darker blues like this blue, and I'm just going to shut down some of the kind of light areas. So if I just go through my layers, so this is the layer with the trees, perhaps if I go to a layer that's kind of immediately underneath that, so this one where the layer 7, where this kind of snow layer is, and if I just shut down some of the light where a lot of the trees are, because there wouldn't be a lot of light that gets through into that region anyway, because presumably all those trees are actually creating shadow on the ground. You're not going to see as much light underneath them. So it makes sense that you would have less light on the snow in that area. Another area I can go back onto is my second layer, and I'm just going to use the first colours that I had on the mountains, which is the white and the kind of earthy colour, and I'm just going to fine tune some of the texture that I would put up at the top. Again, this is something that you could spend a long time on now. Just the tinier details, the little things can be really important, but I think fundamentally if you get the overall effect, then the little details are good fun to do. And obviously if you want to zoom in and you want it to stand up to the close-up kind of scrutiny, then yes, go for the little details. Now, as you can see, I don't zoom in and out on my landscape tutorials. The main reason for that is that, again, I'm just really want to get you focused in on the overall effect. I may at some future point show you how to do some more kind of textural details, although lots of textural things like this are definitely a bit of trial and error. It does take experience to really master and get your head around the kind of texture that would work, to develop a looser hand and gain that kind of confidence, just to be a little bit freer with the textures. Okay, I'm going to leave this particular tutorial at this point. Do check out my playlist, make sure to subscribe. If you want to support me over at Patreon, then do check out the link in the description. Otherwise, I shall catch you back here again soon. See you later.